The cork popped with a sharp crack. I set the bottle of wine down on the counter, the clink of glass almost drowning out the pounding of my heart. The kitchen was quiet, too quiet, and the weight of the moment hit me. 10 years. I had planned this night down to the last detail, a surprise anniversary dinner, just the two of us. It was supposed to be perfect. I reached for my phone, checking the time, 7:15. Emily was running late, which was unusual for her. Just as I unlocked my screen, the message popped up. I need some space from our marriage. I froze. The words didn't make sense at first. A joke, maybe. But then I reread it. Cold, flat. No explanation, just that. I stared at the screen, feeling something twist inside me. I waited, expecting another message to come through, something to soften it, but nothing did. I sat the phone down, the room feeling small all of a sudden. The kitchen, the dinner, everything felt meaningless now. My fingers gripped the counter, and without even thinking about it, I grabbed the plate I'd been preparing for her and threw it in the trash. The glass of wine stayed untouched, its color bright but taunting. I stood there for a few seconds, unsure of what to do next. I should confront her. I should call her, demand an explanation. But I didn't. I didn't want to hear her voice, not yet. I just grabbed my jacket, walked out the door, and slammed it behind me. The cool air hit me as I stepped outside. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to move. The beach wasn't far, and my feet carried me there without thought. The sound of the waves crashing was loud in my ears, but my mind was louder. I thought about all the months leading up to this, the distance between us, the empty evenings, the silences that had grown longer instead of shorter. I walked along the shore, watching the dark water stretch out into the horizon. I started asking myself questions I didn't want to answer. Had I ever really mattered to her? Or had I just been someone she tolerated? Maybe that's all I was, just a placeholder, a man who filled the role but wasn't really seen. Her message echoed in my head. I need some space from our marriage. As if that was all it took to end everything we had built. The life we had shared. 10 years, gone in a single line of text. I kept walking, the sand cold under my feet. No confrontation, no fight. Just me, walking in circles around the questions I couldn't answer. I didn't call her, I didn't beg. I just kept walking, because I didn't know what else to do. The next morning I woke up early, though I hadn't slept much. I stared at the ceiling for a while, wondering what to do with myself. Emily had left by the time I dragged myself out of bed, leaving behind a note on the kitchen counter. I'm going on a weekend retreat. I need time to recharge. Hope you understand. She couldn't even say it to my face. I sat at the counter, the weight of the silence pressing down. A solo retreat. That's what she called it. It seemed harmless enough. Maybe I should have questioned it more, but I didn't. Instead, I tried to focus on the little things, like the coffee brewing in the kitchen and the bills piled up on the counter. It was easier than thinking about the mess between us. Easier than letting myself confront what had already begun to settle deep inside me. By mid-morning, I decided to go for a run. I needed to get out of the house, get my thoughts straight, so I laced up my shoes and hit the pavement. It wasn't about clearing my head. Honestly, I don't think I was ready to clear anything. It was about doing something that wasn't sitting with the knot in my stomach. When I got back, I found myself wandering through the house. I felt like a stranger in my own life, like I didn't belong here anymore. And maybe I didn't. Maybe I was already too far gone to even pretend. I sat at my desk, staring at my phone. I opened the Photos app, scrolling through the pictures we'd taken over the years. There were a lot of them, some of us traveling, some of us at family gatherings. Good memories if I allowed myself to think of them that way. I thought about how Emily used to upload the photos automatically to our shared cloud account, a habit she'd picked up years ago. I hadn't checked it in a while, but today, it felt like I needed to. Something about the way things were slipping away from me made me want to see where they had gone. As soon as I opened the cloud, I noticed some new photos, ones I hadn't seen before. Emily's retreat, I assumed. At first, I just glanced through them, her by a lake, a couple of scenic shots. But then I saw the one that stopped me cold. She was at a bar, smiling, her head tilted slightly as she laughed at something off camera. But that wasn't the part that made my stomach churn. In the background, there was a man's arm, his hand resting casually on the bar, the sleeve of his shirt rolled up. The position of the arm and the way they were standing made it clear that he was close, too close. I zoomed in. The man's face wasn't visible, but I didn't need to see it to recognize the familiarity in the posture, The way his arms sat there with that level of intimacy. My chest tightened. Matthew? Her coworker. I'd seen them together a few times. The way they'd exchange those little private glances. How she'd always laugh a little too loudly at his jokes. It didn't take a genius to know there was something going on between them. I'd told myself I was imagining it, that it was all in my head, but now here it was, proof, right in front of me. I scrolled through a few more of the photos, feeling my pulse quicken. There were more of them, at a different bar, the two of them leaning in close, almost touching. Another shot of them sitting side by side, her hand resting on his leg. A flicker of something, I don't even know what to call it, flared in my chest. I wasn't angry, I wasn't even surprised, but I felt the betrayal like a cold weight, settling heavily around my ribs. All those late nights when she'd said she was working late. All those moments I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid. They weren't paranoia. They were reality. I just didn't want to see it. I sat back in the chair, feeling oddly detached. It wasn't rage that hit me. It was clarity. Cold clarity. I didn't have to guess anymore. I didn't need to hear her excuse. I knew exactly what had been happening. My mind turned over the last few months. The distance. The silence between us. All of it had been leading to this. The worst part wasn't the affair. It was the fact that I had let myself be blind for so long. I'd ignored the signs, convinced myself it would get better, that we'd pull out of the drift, but now it was impossible to ignore. I shut the laptop and stared out the window. My heart was still heavy, but it wasn't shaking in rage anymore. I wasn't angry at Emily, not yet, but I was done. I was done pretending I didn't see it, done hoping it would fix itself. I spent the rest of the weekend by myself, keeping busy with meaningless tasks. A few times, I thought about calling her, demanding answers, but I didn't. I didn't need to. I already knew everything I needed to know. I was just waiting for her to come back. And when she did, I'd be ready. The day after I found the photos, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing at the edge of something. I wasn't mad, at least not yet, but there was a cold certainty in me now. I wasn't going to beg for explanations. I didn't need to. I had all the answers already. So, I went methodically through everything, one step at a time. First, I dove deeper into the cloud account. I'd already seen the most damning photos, but there were more. Hundreds of images from different weekends, bars, places I didn't recognize. More shots of Emily and Matt, laughing too easily, standing too close. They were more than coworkers. They were a couple, or at least pretending to be. I printed the photos one by one, stacked them neatly, organized them in a folder. I wasn't sure what I'd need, but I was certain it would come in handy. No more vague feelings. I was building a case. Then I started going through our financials. The joint account was always where the bills were paid, the mortgage, utilities, and the usual day-to-day stuff. But it was the small things that caught my eye. The trips, the random charges from bars, expensive dinners that I hadn't seen receipts for. No major red flags, just enough to start connecting the dots. Enough for me to feel the ground shift beneath me. I downloaded everything. Receipts, transactions, credit card bills. I knew I'd need a record, something concrete to back up what I already knew. The next step was more personal, but just as necessary. I checked our bank accounts one by one and set up new ones in my name only. I didn't trust her anymore. I rerouted automatic payments, everything, even the smallest ones, just to make sure she couldn't get her hands on anything without me knowing. I made sure the money was mine, that it would stay mine. I checked the deed for the house. My name was the only one on it. I hadn't been married to Emily long enough to have her listed. It felt cold in a way, but also reassuring. At least that part was solid. She couldn't just walk out with everything. I was careful, precise. There was no rush. I wasn't looking to blow things up just yet, but I wasn't going to be passive anymore. I'd spent too many years watching her slip away, convincing myself it was nothing. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. I found a divorce lawyer online. I didn't want to get into a drawn-out battle, so I called, got the details. I didn't need to hear it all, just enough to know that I was doing things the right way. She wouldn't be able to pull anything over on me. I'd take the high road, sure, but I wasn't going to be a sucker. I thought about calling her, confronting her about everything, but I held back. That would come later when it was time. She still didn't know I knew. I hadn't said a word, hadn't even sent a text. But it didn't matter. I knew exactly where we stood now, and I wasn't looking for some big emotional showdown. I was looking for a clean break, a way out. So, I kept my focus. I kept moving, one step at a time, because there was no turning back now. When Emily walked in the door, I didn't move. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the same spot I'd been in all morning, and I didn't even look up as she dropped her bag by the door. She was smiling, her energy the way it always used to be after a trip. She looked at me, then gave a little shrug. "Hey," she said, voice light. "You're up early. The weekend was great, though. Really transformative, you know?" I nodded, my hands wrapped around the mug of coffee in front of me. "Glad to hear it." She leaned against the counter, kicking off her shoes. I could tell she was settling back in, like nothing had happened, like nothing had changed. But everything had. The entire world felt different to me now. I didn't ask about her retreat. I didn't need to. I already knew what I needed to know. The pictures, the receipts, the silence between us. All of it was swirling around me, but I kept my face neutral. She needed to tell me her version. Let her play out the story she thought she could still sell. Emily started talking again, her voice soft and casual. I spent most of the time reflecting, just getting away from everything. A lot of time on my own, you know? I even met some people there, new friends. It was a good reset. She went on about the yoga sessions, the long walks. She sounded like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. I didn't respond. I let her keep talking, let her fill the space with her words, like it was still the same. Like I wasn't listening to every subtle shift in her tone. I didn't interrupt. She didn't need to know that I had already seen the photos. The ones where she was laughing with Matt, the ones where they were touching too closely for comfort. Let her think I was still playing the fool. I took another sip of my coffee, feeling detached from her. I wasn't angry, not yet, but I felt like I was watching a different version of myself. The version who thought this was all still salvageable, who thought we were still in this together. But I was already gone. The person she was speaking to wasn't the person I'd been just a few days ago. I wasn't invested in her story. I wasn't invested in her anymore. "Sounds like you really needed it," I said finally, my voice flat. She didn't seem to notice the distance. She was still floating in her own world, talking about her retreat, about how life-changing it had been. I let her finish, her voice growing a little more animated as she recounted what she ate, where she went, how much clarity she'd found. She was still unaware that I already knew more than she thought, and I wasn't going to ruin the performance. I was content to let her think she was in control. She talked for a few more minutes, not realizing that with every word she spoke, I was mentally ticking things off in my head. Divorce lawyer, check. Financials, check. Photos, check. The house, check. I had everything I needed, every piece of evidence, neatly filed, ready to go. I could feel it all coming together, the slow build toward the inevitable. She finished talking and let out a sigh, as if she were proud of herself. She wasn't even looking at me anymore, too focused on unpacking the things she'd brought back. "You're quiet," she said, finally glancing over at me. I met her eyes, just taking it all in. She smiled, oblivious to the way everything had shifted. "I get it. I think you could use a break too. You should think about doing something for yourself." I didn't say anything. She still didn't get it. She didn't see that I was already done with this version of us, that I wasn't interested in fixing anything anymore. Instead, I stood up and picked up my mug, walking over to the sink. "I'll be fine," I said, setting it down. "I'm glad you're back, though." She smiled again, nodding as she went to grab something from the fridge. I watched her for a moment. The woman I used to know, the one I thought I understood. She didn't know the man she was speaking to wasn't the same anymore. She was still stuck in whatever fantasy she'd built around this weekend. And maybe that was the hardest part, watching her go on, not realizing that the world she was trying to pretend existed wasn't real anymore. I wasn't angry, not yet, but I was done. She'd already made her choices, and soon she'd see I had made mine. The next day I followed through with the one thing I hadn't yet done, checked in with the private investigator. I had hired him the moment Emily told me about her solo retreat, the one I now knew was a lie. It didn't take much to find someone discreet enough to confirm what I already suspected. I wasn't interested in the details, just the facts. When the text came through from the investigator, I wasn't surprised. I knew what I'd find. But still, I opened the images and scanned them quickly, one by one. There they were. Emily and Matt holding hands in a hotel lobby, her face tilted up as she smiled at him in a way that wasn't just friendly. The next photo showed them in a hotel elevator, kissing. Full on, no shame. She didn't even seem to care that someone was capturing the moment. It hit me like a punch to the gut, but there was no emotion in it, just cold, clear acknowledgement of what I had already known. The images kept coming, Matt's arm around her shoulder as they checked into a hotel together. A blurry shot of them leaving a restaurant, heads close, laughing. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of it all sinking in. Emily's weekend getaway wasn't a retreat. It was a carefully planned affair with Matt. The investigator also confirmed something else I hadn't needed to hear, but couldn't ignore. Emily had booked the whole thing under a fake name. I went through each photo one more time, just to make sure. Every detail was consistent with what I had seen before. Nothing was out of place. She hadn't even tried to cover it up. I closed the file and set my phone down. This wasn't about revenge. I didn't want to drag things out or make it a spectacle. I just wanted out. Clean, quiet, no mess. That was all that mattered now. The rest of the evening passed like any other. Emily came home from work, still in the same distracted, distant mood. She barely looked up as she tossed her bag on the couch, her face buried in her phone as usual. She sent a few texts, talked about a meeting, asked if I needed anything from the store. There was no sign of guilt, no hint that she knew I had everything. She made dinner, we ate together in silence. She didn't ask what I'd done all day, didn't probe into my head. I didn't offer any details either. We were living in two separate worlds now, and it felt as natural as breathing. I didn't feel anything about her anymore. Not love, not anger, not even disappointment. I just felt removed. Like I had already stepped out of this marriage 1,000 miles ahead of her. The gap between us had widened so slowly, so steadily, I hadn't even realized how far apart we'd drifted until now. She kept talking, her voice carrying on in the background, a dull hum. I nodded, muttered the occasional response, but my mind was already elsewhere. I was mentally moving on. I had to. Later, when she went to bed, I stayed up a little longer, going over everything again. The divorce papers were in a drawer, ready to be filed. The lawyer had made sure everything was in place. I was covered. I just needed her to leave. I could hear Emily's breathing from the bedroom as she fell asleep. She didn't know that tonight was the last night we'd share this space. That in the morning, everything would change. I wouldn't fight for this anymore. I had already fought for years, trying to hold us together. Now, I was just holding my breath. Thursday morning, Emily left for work, just like any other day. She didn't say much before heading out, just a quick goodbye, a half-hearted kiss on the cheek as she grabbed her bag. It was the same routine as always, the same indifferent energy. I waited for the sound of the front door closing, then I started the countdown in my head. 20 minutes. I didn't want to rush it, but I couldn't delay either. There was no point in waiting any longer. I was done. I grabbed the divorce papers from the drawer, the ones I'd had drawn up the night before, everything carefully outlined by the lawyer. The terms were simple. I didn't need anything from her. No fight, no drama, just the clean break I'd been preparing for. On the kitchen counter, I laid out everything, the papers first, with a letter on top. The letter wasn't long, no need for it to be. Just a few lines that said everything I needed to say. I know about Matt. I know about everything. The photos, the receipts, the lies. This marriage is over. I'm done. Please read the attached and don't contact me unless it's necessary for the divorce proceedings. It wasn't emotional, it wasn't vindictive, it was just clear. I didn't need to explain myself. She had already made her choice, and now, so had I. I paused for a second, looking at the papers on the counter. I wasn't shaking, wasn't uncertain. I was steady, calm, focused. There was nothing left to say or do. The decision was final. No turning back. Once I had everything in place, I sat back down at the table. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel anger. I just felt done. 20 minutes later, I heard the familiar click of the front door as Emily came back home. She sounded like she was in a good mood, laughing at something on the phone, the kind of laugh I hadn't heard in weeks. She didn't notice me at first. She went straight to the kitchen, still on her phone, rambling about her day. She didn't even see the papers on the counter. "Hey, babe," she said, walking past me and heading to the fridge. "I'm thinking of ordering dinner tonight. What do you think? I can't be bothered to cook." I didn't respond right away. I just kept watching her. She was still acting like nothing had changed, like everything was fine. "Ryan?" she asked after a second, noticing I hadn't said anything. She turned to face me, her phone still in her hand. I stood up slowly. "There's something on the counter for you." She raised an eyebrow, but didn't seem to get it. She walked over to the counter, looking at the papers and the letter. For a moment, she just stood there, her eyes scanning the page. Then she looked at me, the confusion in her face turning to something more guarded. "Is this What I think it is? Her voice was softer now, like she was trying to piece it together, trying to figure out what was happening. I didn't move, didn't say anything right away. I just waited for her to read it all. She skimmed the letter, her face changing with every sentence. I could see her tense, her body stiffening, but she didn't say anything. She just stared at me for a few seconds, like she couldn't believe it. "Ryan," she said, finally dropping her phone onto the counter. I don't understand. What is all this? Why now? We can talk about this." Her voice wavered slightly, but I didn't bite. I didn't need to. "You've already talked about it," I said quietly. "You've already made your choices." She tried to step closer, like she wanted to change the tone, but I took a step back, keeping my distance. I wasn't going to engage in this anymore. No, she said, shaking her head. "I didn't mean for things to... This isn't how I wanted it to go. I wasn't thinking, okay? It's not what you think. It was just a mistake." Her words felt like empty air. I could see her trying to find some way to manipulate it, to make me doubt myself. But I wasn't falling for it, not this time. "I don't want to hear it, Emily," I said, calm but firm. "You made your choice. I'm done. You don't need to explain anything." She went quiet for a moment, her face paling. I could see the realization hit her that I wasn't going to change my mind. This wasn't a conversation. This wasn't an emotional scene she could sway. It was over. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. She just stood there, staring at the papers, her hands slightly trembling. "I'll have my lawyer contact you," I said, turning away from her. "You can figure out the rest from there." Without looking back, I walked out of the kitchen, the sound of her voice calling after me fading behind me as I headed into the living room. I was done, and Emily, she was just starting to realize it. I was packing a bag when Emily found the papers. I hadn't heard her move, hadn't heard her approach. She didn't speak at first. I could feel her presence, though, hovering, waiting for me to make eye contact. But I kept my back to her, pulling shirts from the closet, folding them, putting them in the bag with deliberate slowness. I wasn't going anywhere yet, but it felt good to prepare. Then I heard her voice sharp and disbelieving. "Is this really happening?" she asked. "Is this what you want? A divorce?" I didn't turn around. I just zipped the bag shut. "You know it is," I said, flat, calm. The words were simple. No need for drama, no need for a scene. I felt her approach, her footsteps quickening. And then she was in front of me, blocking my way. She was trying to read my face, looking for any sign of hesitation, some crack in my resolve. "Ryan, please," she said, her voice shaky now. This is just a phase, a stupid mistake. I never meant for it to get this far." I raised an eyebrow, not giving her an inch. "A phase? Really? You're still trying to play that card?" She flinched but quickly recovered, trying to spin the narrative back in her favor. "It wasn't like that. Nothing happened the way you're thinking." I stood there for a moment, letting the silence sit between us. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, I reached for the folder I'd left on the counter. I pulled out the first photo, the one of her and Matt, laughing too easily, standing too close at that bar. I held it up between us. "Really?" I asked flatly, letting the word hang in the air. Her face went pale as she glanced at the photo. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I didn't give her the chance to fill the space with lies. "You want to keep lying about it?" I said, voice low. "Or do you want to explain this?" I grabbed another picture, this one from the hotel elevator, Matt's hand on her back, their faces pressed together. Emily's eyes flickered to it, then away. She tried to keep her voice steady, but it cracked a little when she spoke. God, Ryan, it wasn't like that. We were just talking. I never meant for..." I cut her off. I wasn't listening to the excuses anymore. I wasn't trying to make sense of her words. "You didn't mean for what? To cheat, to lie, or to ruin everything we had?" I dropped the photos on the couch, and then I pulled out the hotel reservation. "It's in your name," I said. "You booked a room with Matt. Don't tell me this was just a phase when you're making plans behind my back." She took a step back, her face flushing red, trying to process everything. The disbelief on her face was almost comical, like she thought she could talk her way out of this. But I wasn't buying it anymore. I didn't think you'd find out like this," she mumbled, shaking her head. "I didn't think it would get out of control. It just happened." She threw her hands up in the air, almost pleading now. "It's over, right? I know it was a mistake, but can't we fix this?" "No," I said firmly. "We're done." She stood there for a moment, breathing hard, as if she was waiting for something to change. Maybe for me to take her hand and tell her everything would be fine. But it wasn't coming. She finally let out a shaky breath and turned away from me, walking toward the living room. "Are you serious about the house?" she asked, voice almost hollow. "What about the things we bought together? The furniture? The shared accounts?" I didn't even flinch. I hadn't been worried about that part. "Your name's not on the deed, Emily. You don't get to take anything." She froze for a second, her eyes wide. "You're going to do this? You're going to leave me with nothing?" "I'm not leaving you with nothing. You're leaving me with nothing. You made your choices." I turned away, starting to walk toward the door to grab the rest of my things. I didn't need to argue anymore. It was over. That's when the doorbell rang. Emily shot me a look, confused, but I knew exactly who it was. I opened the door to find Sarah standing there, looking at me with a quiet understanding. "Hey," Sarah said softly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She'd known there was tension between us for a while now, though she'd never asked directly. We'd spoken a few times about how things had been off, how Emily had been distant. She must have known today was the day it all came to a head. "I'll take it from here," Sarah said, her voice steady as she turned to Emily, who was still standing there, frozen. Emily's eyes were wide, her mouth moving, trying to get a word in, but Sarah wasn't having it. "Go ahead and start packing, Emily. I'll make sure this goes smoothly." Emily looked between Sarah and me, her face flushed with a mix of anger and disbelief. She looked like she was going to argue, but then she just walked past me, her steps slow, like she was trying to piece together a new reality, the kind where everything she thought she could control was slipping away. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Sarah shot me a quick, almost imperceptible nod, and I didn't stop to look back. Emily was packing. The rest of it didn't matter. She'd have to figure out what came next, but as far as I was concerned, I was already gone. Emily didn't make a scene when she started packing. There were no tears, no dramatic pleas. She didn't even look at me when she grabbed her suitcase and started shoving clothes in. The silence between us was heavier than anything we'd said to each other in months. I stayed in the living room, watching her move through the house like she was going through the motions. She barely made a sound as she picked up the few things she'd left behind. Some clothes, a few toiletries, a few of her personal things that I didn't care enough about to stop her from taking. When she was done, she paused at the door, her hand on the knob, but she didn't turn around. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Everything had already been said. "I'm leaving," she said quietly. "I'll have someone come by for the rest of my things later." I nodded. She hesitated for a moment, then walked out the door, disappearing into the quiet evening. I stood there for a while, just listening to the sounds of her leaving, her footsteps on the front steps, the door closing behind her. It was all so final. There was no turning back. I didn't feel the weight of anger, not anymore. I didn't feel the sting of betrayal the way I thought I would. Instead, there was just a strange, unshakable sense of peace. It felt like something heavy had finally been lifted from my chest. I went into the kitchen, sat down, and checked my phone. The private investigator had already sent me an update. She hadn't gone to Matt's place. Instead, he'd tracked her to a cheap short-term rental not far from here. She was already looking for somewhere to hide, somewhere to continue whatever it was she'd been doing. I let out a slow breath, the bitterness creeping in again, but I didn't let it settle. I didn't care. She wasn't my problem anymore. I spent the evening alone, pacing through the house, looking at the empty spaces where her things used to be. There was a calmness in it, but also a dull ache. That sense of betrayal, it was still there, lingering, but it didn't feel like my burden anymore. She'd taken that with her, the shame, the guilt, the weight of the lies. It wasn't mine to carry. I made myself dinner, something simple. My mind wandered to the life I'd been living, the years I'd spent trying to patch things up, making excuses, ignoring the obvious signs that I wasn't enough for her anymore. I thought about all the things I'd let slide, all the moments I'd convinced myself would work themselves out. They hadn't. She hadn't. By the time the night stretched on, I was no longer looking at the past. I didn't need to. I was already moving forward. I'd made the decision. The divorce papers would be filed in the morning, and then it would be over. I sat in the quiet, letting the house settle around me. The weight of it all, the marriage, the betrayal, the years, felt distant now. Like it was someone else's story, not mine. When I finally stood up to head for bed, I made sure to check the lock on the door, the little details I hadn't worried about in years. Tomorrow, I'd start my life without her. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a little lighter. Weeks passed, and Emily never reached out. Not a call, not a text, nothing. I hadn't expected her to. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. The silence between us was almost comfortable, a strange relief that I hadn't anticipated. I focused on moving forward. I started picking up the pieces of my life, doing things I'd put off, things I hadn't had the energy for when I was still wrapped up in that marriage. Slowly, it all began to settle. Work got easier. My routine felt more mine, not something dictated by what Emily needed or expected. Sarah checked in on me a couple of times. I didn't need to talk about Emily every time we met, though. So, we didn't. She just came by one Saturday afternoon, a couple of beers in hand, and we sat on the porch in the warm light, talking about everything but the mess that had been my marriage. We joked, shared a couple of stories from the past few years, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was carrying someone else's weight. We talked about everything, from stupid work frustrations to where we wanted to travel once things got back to normal. It felt real. It felt like what life was supposed to be. Uncomplicated, no hidden layers or secrets to untangle. I made the final decision to sell the house a week later. The place that had once felt like home, the one I'd poured so much of myself into, had started to feel like a weight I could never shake off. I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need the reminders of a life that wasn't mine anymore. I donated all the furniture she'd picked out, the ones I'd never really liked but tolerated because they were hers. Everything went. The kitchen was emptier now, but it felt more mine. The house felt lighter, like I could breathe. It took time, but soon I found a new place. Smaller, quieter, but it was mine. It didn't carry the weight of her presence, the baggage of what had been. The first night I spent there, I felt a peace that I hadn't known in years. The walls didn't feel like they were closing in. There was no tension hanging over me. A few days later, I got a text from Emily. It was out of nowhere, like a distant echo of a life I had already left behind. "Do you hate me?" the message read. I stared at it for a few seconds. I don't know what I was expecting. Guilt, desperation, a last-ditch effort to get under my skin. But I didn't feel any of that. I read the text once more, then deleted it without replying. I didn't hate her. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't even feel sorry for her. I just didn't need her in my life. Sarah came over again a few nights later, bringing dinner this time, and we sat in my new living room, eating and talking like we used to. We didn't talk about Emily. There was no point. Instead, we talked about the future, about the little things that had once seemed so important, but now felt insignificant. It was quieter this time, calmer, like we both understood that everything I had been holding on to was behind me now. The past wasn't something to keep dragging around. I sat back on the couch, feeling the weight lift with every word we exchanged. The finality of it all settled in. I wasn't looking back anymore. What mattered now was the path forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free.